If you're visiting with us, you're in the middle of a series that we're looking at, and hopefully this morning will be relevant to you. I'm going to try and make sure that's the case. It's often hard when you come into the middle of a series, but this is such a rich book that you're bound to get something out of it. And so last week we looked at Hebrews 7, and hopefully what we're beginning to see as this book unfolds, and we're kind of halfway through it obviously, is that we can see the strong link between the Old and New Testament. Now, lots of people like us, because of our Western Greek thinking, tend to want to compartmentalize those two books, so those two testaments, Old and New. And we tend to have particular preconceived ideas about the Old Testament that are probably expired, no longer required or whatever, because that's what we've learned, that's what we've been told. The book of Hebrews is like a portal that joins the two incredibly, speaks to the very heart of the Old Testament, brings it to light under the light of Jesus. And so we spoke last week particularly about this idea or biblical concept of typology, which basically connects Old and New Testament. And so we said in the Old Testament there are many types, and Melchizedek was one of those from Hebrews 7, who represented the ministry of Jesus. Melchizedek, of course, as we saw, was only mentioned twice in the Old Testament. Obscure character that the author to the Hebrews said had no beginning and no end. In other words, he just showed up and brought a blessing to Abraham. Abraham, of course, tithed to him. There was a blessing involved, and there's a whole story behind that. And then in Psalms, later, there's this mention that there's going to be another one coming in the form of Melchizedek, without beginning and without end. And of course, it's referring to Jesus. And so it's a picture type. And we also said that Jesus is the antitype. Now that sounds like a bad word. In this case, it's a good word. So it's the opposite of the type. If Melchizedek was the shadow, Jesus is the reality. And so these ideas of types and antitypes and shadows very much are the way the writer to the Hebrews speaks to us. And it's really helpful if we can understand that. And so obviously as a church, you guys know that we value the Word of God. It's one of those things that just is not going to go away. We're a truth-based church, and we know that we don't have truth, so we go back to Scripture when it comes to these things. I love what St. Augustine says about the relationship between the Testaments. He says in a very redundant kind of language, but we kind of get this Yoda-ism. He says the new is in the old contained. So it's kind of talking backwards. Remember Yoda in Star Wars? You had to be there. And then he says the old is by the new explained. And so when we read the Old Testament, we read it with New Testament eyes because we've been enlightened. We've been there. We're in the New Testament. And so we read the Old Testament from a very different perspective to even how the people who penned it intended. Because God knew, He could see ahead. I said at least, that the antitype is the real thing, that's Jesus. The type is the image. In other words, the shadow. Remember the illustration. This is not a great illustration because we've got so many lights here that I'm casting shadows everywhere. But if we had one source of light, you would have one shadow that would represent you reasonably well. And depending on where the light is, depends on how big you are and how wide you are and all those sorts of things. But there is a representation. The shadow isn't you, but it's a reflection of you. The New Testament is the reality of the Old Testament. So that's basically, if you missed last week, you didn't have to come at all, did you? I didn't mean that. And so Hebrews 8 continues on with this thing in the back of our mind. We've got to remember this. It continues on with the idea of shadows, the shadow of the past, if you like. In Hebrews 8, chapter 13, and we're going right to the end of it before we even start, it says, by calling this covenant new, He has made the first one obsolete, and what is obsolete and aging will soon disappear. So the shadows are disappearing. It's getting late in the day. The Lord's returning. Things are moving on. The kingdom is on the move. And so the further we advance, the kind of longer the shadows get. And eventually, as the author to the Hebrews says, they will disappear. Now, obsolescence is a very interesting concept again. Obsolescence doesn't mean it's done with. It just means there's a better way. So version 2 has come out. Version 1.0 is gone, if you want to think of it in the modern vernacular. Version 2 has come out. Obsolescence has set in. The old thing still works, but there's a better way of doing it. That's the New Testament. And so with that in mind, we're going to jump into Hebrews 8 and start to do a bit of mining. So let's bring it on. This obviously tells us that we need to understand, and particularly in the light of Hebrews, the relationship between the shadow and the real. Now, we think that what we're doing is real. We think that we're actually living out reality. What the Bible teaches us is that reality is going on up there. This is a shadow of the things happening in heaven. That's at least the way it's meant to be. Remember last week I said the shadow is the representation of the real. What's going on here is a representation of eternal reality. The shadow itself only exists because there is actual light shining on something, on an object or a person. And by doing that, the shadow is revealed. And so in Hebrews 8, we're going to pick it up right from the first verse. And it says, the point of what we are saying is this. Again, I love this plural representation by the writer to the Hebrews. So there's a committee writing this thing. The point of what we are saying is this. We do have such a high priest who sat down at the right hand of the throne of the majesty in heaven, and who serves in the sanctuary. And so that's going on. That's going on up there. And it says, the true tabernacle set up by the Lord, not by man. Every high priest is appointed to offer both gifts and sacrifices. And so it was necessary for this one also to have something to offer. If he were on earth, he would not be a priest, for there are already men who offer the gifts prescribed by the law. Verse 5. They serve at a sanctuary that is a copy and shadow of what is in heaven. Can you see that concept coming through? And if we read through Hebrews really quickly, you miss these things. And so there's this very distinct model going on where heaven has this real worship service that's begun and it's going to go through to eternity. And on earth, when we meet like this, we are meant to be a shadow of what's happening in heaven. And it doesn't make this bad. It just means we're not there yet. And until we get there, we enjoy the shadow. This is why Moses was warned when he was about to build the tabernacle. And then it unfolds the warning. See to it that you make everything according to the pattern shown you on the mountain. But the ministry Jesus has received is as superior to theirs as the covenant of which he is a mediator is superior to the old one. And it is founded on better promises. For if there had been nothing wrong with that first covenant, no place would have been sought for another. I love it when you're here. I feel really good about talking when you're here, Christos. I actually started to get excited about me. And that takes a bit. This week, think about this. This week we've seen, the Bible is always relevant, guys. It always speaks to current events. This week we've seen two high-profile Christians in serious, serious trouble. Serious crises of faith, to the point where one of these guys, Josh Harris, has actually renounced his faith. Now, this guy was the pastor of a mega church in the US. Tragic stuff. You guys might remember a book he wrote. It was called, I think, something like, I can't remember. It was like Kissing Dating Goodbye or something like that. And so the headlines in the paper read, Josh Harris kisses God goodbye. What a horrible, horrible, horrible headline. And the other guy, and we have to name them because they're in the papers. I mean, we're not going to put our heads in the sand, are we? The other guy is Marty Sampson, a worship leader at Hillsong, who has basically said publicly on Twitter or one of those social media things, he said that I'm genuinely losing my faith and it doesn't bother me. This is tragic. This is the kind of tragic stuff that we're going to see. Things are moving on. Things are maturing in not such a good way. And more, you and I are called to represent Jesus. And in doing so, we become a shadow, we become a copy, we become a prototype in many ways of representing who Jesus is here on earth. Both these guys have come from megachurch evangelicalism. There's a mouthful for you. The question that troubles me this week, as I've prepared this talk, is, are we a valid expression as a church? Are we a valid expression of what's going on up there? Are we a valid shadow of what's taking place in heaven? A reflection of the real? I've always had problems, as you guys know, the people that know us well and have been travelling along this journey with us. I've always had problems with much of the hype and performance that's come out of the megachurch movement. I think there are many good parts to big churches. I love the fact that because there are so many, there's a critical mass that can actually change the community if we all get our heads around that thing. So I'm not anti-megachurch. But I hate some of the stuff that goes with it, with a passion. I'm not suggesting that all large churches are in crisis. But I do believe that we, as the Christian movement, if you like, is facing a major crisis. And the crisis is centered around these areas. That every preacher is a celebrity. Not here. I'm not even good enough to make celebrity status, thankfully. Every worship leader wants to attain rock star status. Again, I'm loving what the Lord's doing with our worship team here. There's a real humility. Alana, you led with such authority this morning and gentleness at the same time. How do you put those two things together? And so we love that. I hate the fact, though, that there is an absence of biblical teaching and preaching in favour of the TED Talks. You know those things that are on the internet that are meant to inspire you, and you hear them and you go away and you've forgotten every word. You felt good at the time, but what the heck did he say? They're of little use, and unfortunately, this is what we're doing. This is how the church has evolved in the 21st century. We've gone down this road of entertainment. We have celebrity preachers. We have rock star worship leaders. We have the inspirational TED Talks with all the smoke and mirrors and stuff that's of zero value, basically. And that the Word of God all the time is sitting here as an anchor. And what we're meant to be doing, according to the author of the book of Hebrews, is representing this eternal worship service that's going on up there. And so this is the only measurement, guys, that we want to use to measure where we're at with Jesus. We don't want to measure whether they hit a bad note or whether, we liked that song because it appealed to our emotions. Those things may be important, but they're not the things that we measure the success or failure of church on. We measure the success or failure of what we're doing here on Sundays and outside there through the week by whether we're accurately representing what's happening in heaven. This is really what the theology of the kingdom is all about. Jesus is the king. Jesus sits on the throne and rules, and everyone who bends the knee to Jesus ultimately will begin to represent him. The problem we're facing, of course, is that these people are not bending their knee to Jesus, and nobody's immune. Doesn't matter whether you're the pastor, whether you're welcome at the door, whether you serve in kids' church, whether you serve in the cafe, or whether you just show up 10 minutes late every week for church. We're all in the same boat. Hebrews, two particular verses that I want to look at here are Hebrews chapter 8 and verse 2, where it illustrates beautifully that in heaven there is a true tabernacle. What's the tabernacle? Remember, it's the tent of meeting in the Old Testament. It's where they gathered to worship God. It's where Moses and the priests served the Lord by offering sacrifices on behalf of Israel. And so if you shift that to the 21st century, the tabernacle is what we're doing now. We're tabernacling. We're camped here because God's here, and we're meeting together with our friends, and we want to worship Jesus. And it says the true tabernacle is actually set up by man, not God. And that's okay. The reflection is. But the true tabernacle in heaven is set up by Jesus. And you see, if we if we take the time to ask God what's happening in heaven and respond to that in a way that's responsible and culture current and all those other things, then we're going to have a fairly good shadow. Verse 5 goes on to say, they, referring to us, the earthly ministers or priests, they serve at a sanctuary that is a copy and shadow of what's in heaven. And so this is not rocket science. It does require discipline. If we want to have church that is honouring and blessing to Jesus, and I love the word, Diane, that you had this morning, speaking from God's perspective in the first person, and it's lovely to hear the Lord thanking us. I actually think he does that. The Lord loves to be blessed. You know, the thing that blesses God is when we worship him. It's when we truly worship him. And I think it blesses God when the shadow has a very close resemblance to what's happening up there. And so our aim as a church, and our leadership team, our board, we went away yesterday, and I'm not going to tell you everything that we did. We had too much fun for it to be an official church meeting. But we spent most of yesterday thinking about some of the things that really make us who we are as a local church. And I think one of the things that we focus on is that we want to represent Jesus. I think we have a genuine desire to do that. I'm excited about what God's going to do. I hope that we're not the only church around here that's doing this. I don't think we are. But there is a minority. We're part of a minority. And we can only become the majority when we do what we're doing well, when we're passionate, when we come to Jesus and expect him to be here on Sundays. Now, Christianity isn't just about Sundays. We all know that. But I think one of the failures of the 20th and 21st centuries, the last 40 years, is that we've devalued meeting together on Sundays. There's all these ideas now about what church is, the postmodern view and all that sort of stuff. And it's all very tantalizing and titillating and whatever other words that start with a T that you want to put there. But is it a shadow of what's happening in heaven? I suspect not. I don't think the church is fragmented in heaven. I don't think it's scattered all over the four corners of the universe. I think it's actually centered around a person. And I think when there's one person in the middle of the church, there's got to be a gathering effect. And so when we come together on Sunday morning, we're actually reflecting that very thing. My question to us is this: is our worship here at Southland, and I have no concern about what's going on out there because I can't change anything, and neither can you. But is our worship here a shadow of what's happening in the eternal worship service in heaven? And it's okay if the shadow's flawed. I'm not saying this has got to be perfect. Shadows, by their very nature, have tree trunks hanging across them and all sorts of other things that intervene. And so there's going to be flaws, but clearly it's God's intention that our worship services are not about us, that they're not about entertainment, that they're not about tantalizing. Our worship services are about him. They're about a people of God gathered around the King, reflecting him as best as we possibly can. And guys, that takes hard work. It doesn't just happen. There's a wonderful, and again, Tristan, thank you for putting up the volunteer call this morning. There's a wonderful team of volunteers here that keep this church going. Deb and I couldn't do that on our own, but we want more. We want you guys to join in. We want you to be part of the solution. So sign up, get involved. Clearly it's God's intention that our worship service has an eternal effect, that it's relevant. I love, of course, the Lord's Prayer, and this should remind us of how tightly knitted together the Scriptures are. There's such cohesion. I don't understand people that say the Bible is full of contradictions. It's full of eyewitnesses that saw things slightly differently, but the same events took place. In Matthew 6, verse 9, it says, "This then is how you should pray. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name." It's all about you. "Your kingdom come, your will be done here on earth as it is in heaven." What's that language? It's kingdom language. It's saying, in essence, the same thing as what we're saying this morning. There's something going on up there in heaven that we need here. That's putting it in basic Australian English. God, would you bring that on? Would you bring that on? Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. Your will be done, please, here on earth as it's going on up there. That's what the author to the Hebrews is saying when it comes to worship, a worship service. And this thing flows right through into our whole lives. Again, as Greek thinkers, we want to compartmentalize this, and we want to have a lovely church on Sunday and then go to the pubs and do whatever we like through the week. You can go to the pubs, but don't do whatever you like. God's intention is that eventually the shadow will become unnecessary. The shadow and the real thing will be so intertwined that we won't even know the difference. And there's a progressive thing unfolding. I don't think the church will ever be perfected this side of the second coming of Jesus. But God is calling us to press in and to become good representations of what's going on in heaven. Whenever we bow to Jesus in a genuine worship experience, and I think we're doing that. I think we can do better. We can always do better, but I think we're doing that. We are part of the shadow of God's kingdom here on earth. We're part of the shadow that Jesus himself is casting over the earth. We're part of the solution. Some of you are old enough to remember Keith Green. He actually died before I became a Christian. I was devastated 2 years after we became Christian, and we didn't have internet back then, so you didn't know everything like we do now. And we discovered 2 years later that Keith Green had died. And I'd already bought every song that he'd ever written and immersed myself in it. It was blowing. I was a pile of tears and snot every time I put the music on, because it just poured out of me as I absorbed what he was saying. And he had some wonderful throwaway lines. One of them was this: "Hey man, this is like living in a garbage can compared to what's going on up there." Do you remember that, some of you guys? I mean, it's soaked in the whole hippie Jesus people type language. And then at the end of it, he says, "I can't wait to get to heaven." And so you know what? Inside of us, we're all programmed for that. We may not have discovered it yet. Our friends may not have discovered it yet. There's people out in the world that don't even know that yet, but we're programmed for something greater than what we're experiencing here. Keith Green knew that. He was a fairly new Christian. He didn't mince his words. He was very prophetic. He probably thought with his mouth and regretted a lot of stuff afterwards, as many extroverts do. I live with one, so I know all about that stuff. Is she here? But God bless them. They know what they're talking about. Is she here? Is she? Oh, okay. I'll stop there. Thanks, Deb. We should have an ever-increasing dissatisfaction with the shadow. Because I believe as we have an ever-increasing dissatisfaction with the shadow and an ever-increasing hunger for the real thing, we're going to cast a much tighter, much darker, much clearer shadow. A much better representation of Jesus. This is what the writer to the Hebrews is on about. This is what has already gone on. We're building on to the legacy that we've inherited from our forefathers. We're building on, as the writer to the Hebrews was speaking to Jewish people, we're building on to our heritage. Nothing has been wasted. Everything that had gone before, this was his exhortation or her exhortation or their exhortation. Everything that had gone on before has been worthwhile, but we're not there yet. It's getting better, and it's getting better, and we need to push in more and harder. We need to see that representation of heaven happening here. And it says in verse 6, "But the ministry Jesus has received is as superior to theirs as the covenant of which he is a mediator is superior to the old one. And it is founded on better promises. For if there had been nothing wrong with that first covenant, no place would have been sought for another." And so history, biblical history, is progressive. We're on the move. We're catching up gradually with God's plans. Remember, this letter was written predominantly to help the Jewish believers embrace the reality of Jesus, the Messiah, in the New Testament. This was their day. Everything they had anticipated for thousands of years had come to this moment. And many of them didn't believe it. They didn't even understand it. I think we have a bit of that problem ourselves. I think sometimes we've had it so good that we don't realize that God's been the author of that goodness. And we move on to mediocre. We kind of brush it off. We take the blessings of God for granted because we don't understand that there's an imminence about the kingdom. God wants to press in on us. He wants us to become shadows. But the real thing is so much better. Again, biblical spirituality looks for the greater reality all the time. That's what we're doing. We're mining. That's why we say when we come to the Word of God, we're mining, because there are things in here we haven't comprehended yet. And it doesn't matter how many times you've read Scripture. As a local church, you guys know, we value God's Word. And we've got to not just say we value God's Word, that's got to become a reality. We can't possibly experience God's presence in His kingdom without understanding the Word as best we possibly can. And so the fulfillment of the Old Testament through the coming of Christ is evidence of this progressive nature of what's taking place. Things are still moving ahead. Let's pick it up in verse 8. Remember, I promised a few weeks ago we were going to read every word of Hebrews. It says, "But God found fault with the people and said, 'The time is coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah. It will not be like the covenant I made with their forefathers when I took them by the hand to lead them out of Egypt, because they did not remain faithful to my covenant, and I turned away from them, declares the Lord.'" Verse 10. "This is the covenant I will make with the house of Israel after that time, declares the Lord. I will put my laws in their minds and write them on their hearts. I will be their God and they will be my people. No longer will a man teach his neighbor or a man his brother, saying, 'Know the Lord,' because they will all know me, from the least of them to the greatest. For I will forgive their wickedness and remember their sin no more." That's where we're heading. That's the destination. And it's happening. The new covenant's changed it. People know what sin is, even if it's been buried. They know deep down in their hearts. The first thing that happens to people when they come to Christ is an awareness of their sin, because it's always been there. You wouldn't know it by looking at the world, but that's the truth. Because God's written His law in our hearts. There's a progressive thing happening. This scripture is a direct quote, obviously, from the Old Testament. It comes from Isaiah 31. And it really illustrates the role of prophecy, which is to reveal the greater truth beyond the shadows of our current experience. That's a bit of a mouthful. Essentially, that's why we do prophecy when we come together like this. Because we're looking forward to what God's doing, to what He's revealing, the unfolding revelation that lies ahead of us. Prophecy is important. This is not just your time to have the microphone. I know we don't have too many people like that. This is our time to hear from Jesus. And so sometimes we're fairly brutal in the way we handle prophecy. Remember, I asked you permission a couple of years ago that if we go down this road of becoming prophetic, which I think we're doing, we've moved beyond the pathetic and we're moving into the prophetic, and eventually we'll step out of the shadows and into the real. But in that process, I asked your permission. I said, guys, if we're going to do this, then this is going to be a bit of a process. There's going to be times where there's correction and rebuke, and it's going to get public, and it's going to get like that. And we've done that. We've come through a lot of tough stuff. And there's been a lot of learning. And what we're seeing now is that the prophetic words are getting stronger and stronger. I think this morning, and the cohesion that's going on is great. We're getting there. This is great. This is the kind of church I want to belong to. Like I said, we've just come back from this retreat as a board where we focused on the things that are important to us as a church. This is one of the things that's vital to us. Our value of the kingdom is so vital. Our values statement, you may have seen it, it's on the website. I was about to get an upgrade just so that it's a bit easier to read. Our values haven't changed. We're just going to reword the way we state it. But our values statement deals with, to a certain degree, what we're talking about this morning. Our values affect everything we do. And there are three particular values that a newcomer that comes to Southland Church hopefully detects as soon as they walk in. Their knower picks it up. As soon as they walk in the door, they know that we have these values. And the first of them is the value of integrity. Again, this is in sharp contrast to what's happening out there. Not everything that's out there lacks integrity, but there's a lot of stuff that does. And so we say it's important for us to speak the truth, to deal honestly, to live uprightly. We will always confess that we don't do that particularly well. But if we don't do it well, you guys are going to see it, because we're going to be transparent about it. And so our leadership are committed to that. We also value reality. We're going to tell it like it is, to the best of our knowledge. We may get it wrong, but we'll never lie to you. We aim to walk in the Spirit. We aim to see the supernatural works of God. And you know what? If God doesn't heal, we're not going to make it look like He is healing. We're going to have coffee instead. We aim to function on the natural plane based on God's leading in conjunction with an excellent and relational kind of thinking. I'm not big on the word excellent. I don't like that word much. We'll probably get rid of that. I think there's an overemphasis on striving for excellence. I just want to strive for reality. And I think in the striving for reality, we're going to see God's majesty, and that would be very excellent. We also value simplicity. We don't have a lot of bells and whistles. I don't know if you've noticed that. You know, we don't use a lot of mood music. Often when we have a ministry time, there's no worship in the background, because we don't want things to get in the way. We don't want to create something that's not happening. As a public speaker, some of you guys have done this, you'll know that it's not that hard to manipulate an audience. This is why much of the church is in crisis, because what we're experiencing isn't real. It's not simple. It's not dumbed. Well, I don't like dumbing things down either, but it's not just the stuff as it is. We're trying to create something. We have an atmospheric thing going on. And so as a church, we wish to do nothing for religious effect. We don't want to have special effects. Rather, we want to operate in a natural, low-key, non-hype way, almost to the point where we quench the Spirit. And you might go, oh, gee, I don't know if that's for me. The Spirit we're quenching is this one. We can't, you know, the Holy Spirit's not that skittish. He created the world, and it went poof. It's called the Big Bang, apparently. We desire to do the ministry of Christ with joy and as simple as we can, without distraction. These values, I believe, will help us to keep the shadow as close as possible to the reality of what's going on up there. And if it doesn't resemble that, we'll know that we have to change things. It'll be obvious because we won't have created some kind of an illusion. Again, this is what's going on in the church today, and I'm just speaking to this very briefly this morning because I think it's important to us. We need to understand, guys, we're going to see high-profile people fall because many areas of the church are built on a house of cards, and it's all going to come tumbling in unless people change. So we're committed to not having that happen. I'd rather blow the house over now and completely destroy it than build something that's going to fall over later and destroy people's lives. And so Deb and I and our leadership team are committed to integrity, reality, simplicity. These are the things that make Southland Church honest. And these are the things, that's my front doorbell at home that just rang. These are the things, I do, I've got Ring. These are the things also that make us a shadow of what's going on in heaven. And I want us to be mindful of that constantly. We're a kingdom church. What that means is that we want to experience what's going on up there because it's a garbage can down here. As long as we have breath in our lungs, we must never become slaves to performance, hype, or super spiritual behavior. We're going to expose you if you're involved in that stuff, big time. When the power of God breaks in at Southland, and I say when, because even at my age, I'm anticipating this is going to happen. When the power of God breaks in at Southland, everybody's going to know it. Because it's just us. And He is going to come and show off big time. Because it's just about us at this stage. There's nothing here that's going to distract that when it happens. I'm determined that that's the case. And I would rather that God didn't break in, that didn't happen. I do not want to create something that we spend an eternity regretting. One day, this experience will be obsolete. Finishing off with Hebrews 8:13, it's the one we started with. By calling this covenant new, he's made the first one obsolete. And what is obsolete and aging will soon disappear. I think that's speaking about people like Mike and I. When the new version arrives, the old becomes obsolete. Now, as I said before, obsolescence is a good thing because it indicates that something better has arrived. And, the tech companies cash in on that reality very much so. In 1 Corinthians 13, and just diverging a little bit here for a little while, Paul the Apostle makes a statement about obsolescence. He says in verse 9 of 1 Corinthians 13, "For we know in part and we prophesy in part, but when perfection comes, the imperfect disappears." You see, the kind of church that we're talking about this morning has no problem with obsolescence. We have a hunger for the next version. We have a hunger for the real thing. We're not going to be bound to our systems or our models or the way we do things. We're just going to have these values that are very, very simple. Just as the Old Testament gives way to the New, this realm that we're a part of now is going to give way to the real thing. And when that happens, it's happened through history. We call it revival, where the future breaks in, where the thing that's happening in heaven becomes real on earth for a moment. That's what we're looking for, in a lasting and an ongoing way. Sometimes we get a glimpse of it. When reality breaks in, the shadow is completely obscured because the presence of God is so strong. That's the kind of thing we're looking for. Some people think that this should be normal. Again, if you listen to some preaching and teachers, they'll convince you that should be the norm, but I don't see that in Scripture. I see that for this time at least, we are meant to represent Him just by being who we are and allowing Him to cast His shadow over us. And so our prayer is simply, "Come, Holy Spirit." Our prayer is, "Come, Holy Spirit." We can't do this. We can't do it. We can only be true to who we are. We can only be faithful to Jesus. We can only be the kind of people that have a clear conscience when we stand in front of Him. And hopefully He says, "Well done, good and faithful servant." That's the only thing we can do. And guys, I am really excited. I think that's where we're heading. I think we're on the same page. We've been doing this now for 25 years. And I reckon the church has probably grown and shrunk over that time. We're in as good a shape now as we've ever been. We're not as big as we used to be. But guys, there's some really, really good things happening here. And God's assembled us all here for such a time.